Thank you for the introduction, Catherine. My name is Max Ahrens, and I'm the CTO of T-Systems. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because we will be tackling a topic which is a lot debated currently. Digital sovereignty in Europe and sovereign cloud is something where you see a lot in the press, but it's not really clear. So I'm looking forward to this conversation to try to dig a little bit deeper into it and also explain how it fits to the automotive industry. And I have with me, and I'm very grateful to that, Hartmut Mueller, who's the CTO from Mercedes-Benz and the VP of Infrastructure. Great to have you, Hartmut.
Thanks, Max, for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
And Hartmut is not only because he's now with Mercedes-Benz, my perfect candidate to talk to, but he has also a telco history. So he knows the telco industry inside out as well. So I guess we're going to have an interesting conversation. The cloud as such is a topic which has been disrupting industries over the last years already. And it's getting more and more complex. It's a little bit like this Rubik's Cube here. It looks like a small issue, a small problem to solve, but it presents 43 quintillion opportunities or possibilities to make it right. So you have a lot of things that you can turn and to get the right approach to the cloud. And this thing can be solved by experts in a matter of seconds, although it presents so many opportunities. And I think that's also the way where we are on the cloud journey. There are more and more opportunities coming in on how to get into the cloud. It's getting more complex, but at the same time, the journey towards the cloud accelerates. And we should never forget, on that journey, we are still in the very, very early days. The majority of the things that we run in enterprises that can be digitized are not yet digitized. So I think the next years are going to be just the same as the last years, but the acceleration will continue. I think that's true for any industry, but also especially, I think the automotive industry is a very interesting case to look into. So Hartmut, what's your view on the importance of digitization in the automotive industry?
I think what you said, digitization in the automotive industry became a key discipline over the years. And not least because today's vehicles, and I'm calling them data centers on wheels, and no matter whether cars or trucks, are real software assets. And this is precisely why we want and need to safeguard our data sovereignty with a data ecosystem like Catena-X, for instance.
Yeah, so you touched on data sovereignty, and that's going to be the core conversation of today. And I think if I look at how we are talking about sovereignty, it's a little bit like this side of the Rubik's Cube, right? A lot of talk, but it's not yet 100% clear, you know, and our approach should be to make it like this today so that we create a clear picture on what is data sovereignty, digital sovereignty in detail. So kind of let's start dissecting it a little. I think if we talk about digital sovereignty, there are two aspects to that. One is data sovereignty, and data, I mean, that has been in the discussion already for a long, long time, that the data ownership needs to be controlled in a smarter way. I always say we need to be able to share, but not to give away, which is very hard to solve, but it is important to accelerate the usage of data from customers, from our products throughout the value chain. And the second element of it is technology sovereignty, keeping control of the value chain, of the digital value chain, which is, I think, something that also is at the heart of how the automotive industry is producing, right? I mean, you have a huge network of suppliers, and these suppliers produce a good part of the vehicle, but there's no question that you guys, as the car manufacturers themselves, control the value chain. And I think that's similar to what's happening in the digital sphere. So what's your view on that when we talk about these two elements and how they fit into your industry approach?
I think what you mentioned, looking on the one hand side on data sovereignty, GDPR, for instance, is a very important stuff for us. You know, that we keep the data sovereignty with also our digital assets and digital products is one of the key, especially when we go to extraterritorial aspects of the US Cloud Act, actually, which passed in 2018, which are potentially conflicting also with the Europe's GDPR. And also, as a global company, it is very important that we not look on it locally from a European perspective. We have to look from a global perspective on it. So that's one element. The second element is, of course, technological sovereignty, which is important for our digital value chain to control the chain itself. And the far more, as technologies are converging, it's important to stay agnostic here.
Yeah, I think this is how the automotive industry looks at it, but also other industries, like in the telco industry, we have exactly the same challenge here, right? We need to serve clients on a global basis, so we can't look at it in a way where we close national borders or Europe's borders. But at the same time, we need to make sure that the solutions are truly sovereign to be able to also follow the needs of the clients. That's what clients in Europe want. They want to be able to know what happens with the data, to have transparency on these things. So far, so good. But if I look at practical conversations, if I look at how when I talk to CIOs, CTOs about that, it always seems like a good idea, but there must be a flip side to it, right? I mean, nothing comes for free. So what's your view, Hartmut, on the flip side of buying into or generating digital sovereignty for our digital products?
I think when you talk about the flip side, for me, mainly it's about how we are driving that in Europe. Because also, I think Corona showed us quite heavily that Europe's industry and public sector is falling behind digitization. I think we have to catch up here. And that's, to a certain element, also because of lack of trust and simply legal restructurings. So I think there is a need on the one hand side to set up the right regulations and to have the right policies and regulations in place so that global companies, but also local companies can emerge.
I think you made a very good point here, which is about this close interlink between technology on the one hand side and the legal situation we are working in. And I think, especially if I look at smaller companies, one of the things that we see is that because of the uncertainty, there is a slow progress when it comes to building digital products, moving into the digital world. And I think that is the true challenge that we are facing with, or that we try to overcome with having a clear solution to digital sovereignty that will make sure that clients feel safe and accelerate towards the cloud and other digital services. So that's, I think we are aligned on that. I think, though, it must be a combination of right technologies and a suitable legal framework that is clear, simple, and transparent. And I think with that, we will be able to accelerate our digitization in Europe. So far, so good. But now we let's look a little bit deeper in the automotive industry, right? So we've been launching the Catena X project a few weeks back now. And let's have a deeper look at it. So what is it about? What is Catena and why did we do that, Hartmut?
I'm very curious about it because for us, it's an information network for the automotive industry, initiated by a number of major German corporations. And of course, now we also that global companies have joined as well. And the goal, and I think that's also very important, is to systemically enforce overdue digitization in the industry and create a data ecosystem for us that is open to all companies. It means open source plays a key role in it, and that for the European automotive industry as well as for the partners and for the suppliers. And I think what we can tackle as well with Catena X is that we are reducing the lack of overarching trust caused by the hesitation also for digitization across our industries. Yeah,
I agree. And I think especially I want to kind of double down on on the open source aspect, because I think it is crucial and is the reflection of what technology sovereignty actually means. Open source is, I think, the best answer to be able to say, I have control about the technology I'm using. That's why it's such a fundamental principle to use open source technologies in projects like Catena, where we are building an ecosystem that goes across multiple vendors, multiple users in the industry. But on the other hand, the question is fair to ask, why should this work, right? There have been many attempts to build things throughout the value chain, so across industries in a like co-opetition situation, and it hardly ever worked. So why should it work this time? And what's the actual pressure points that we see in the industry that will overcome the point to say, let's cooperate for the better of all? Because I think when you want to do things like that, you always need two things, right? You need an opportunity, which I think we have with pooling data, etc. But you also need a threat. You need to have a need that is so strong that you say, okay, let's get moving now. So what's your view on this one, Hartmut?
I think first it's built on the values and standards of Gaia X. That is also important for us when we talk about Catena X. That means we are talking about data sovereignty, but also we are talking about technology sovereignty. That's very important. The second element is really that we are saying, let's build a trusted and secure infrastructure where all members and stakeholders can efficiently and securely connect their data on the one hand side, the assets, but also the business processes, while maintaining vendor and technology openness. I think what you mentioned regarding open source is a key element, but also looking to the technology platforms underlying, it's very important that we have in mind open source, that we have in mind it's a decentralized ecosystem about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also that is why you can ask yourself, why don't we just take it and do it right now, right? There are tons of platforms out there that you can use from the large industry giants in the cloud. But the thing here is we are not trying to say we are building a competitive version of a cloud. We're trying to solve a problem which is distributed by nature because we go across the value chain, and hence it cannot live in a single environment. And secondly, which really works towards the needs of the industry in Europe, which is different from the industries in other parts of the world. We have a much more dissected value chain. We have like 7, 8 levels of the value chain, each in different companies, which is the foundation of our industry, the famous German Mittelstand. And that's a powerhouse, but it also makes it much more difficult to create data-driven use cases, data-driven business models, because the data is split over these 7, 8 steps of the value chain. And this is why the whole idea of building data spaces is so powerful, because a data space is something where you can actually do what I call share but not give away. It's a way, the way it's built, the way the technologies are being used. You can give data for a certain use case, but you keep the ownership, and you don't give away all your production data for future analysis. And that's exactly what we are doing here. We're solving a specific problem in the European industry with a solution that's by nature distributed and open, and hence it should overcome all these barriers that we see when it comes to pooling data and these approaches that were tried but haven't really worked in the past. But you already mentioned Gaia X, and I think that's also an important element. And I guess there may be a little bit of confusion around how do all these things fit together, right? We have Gaia X, we have Catena X, we have other initiatives around. So what's your view, Hartmut, on the relationship between Gaia X and Catena X? Are they built together, or are they kind of not working together the right way?
No, I think actually Gaia X provides the fundament also for initiatives like Catena X, because when you look to Catena X, it's about exchange data between an automotive network, so to say. It's about cooperation, integration, it's time to market or faster time to market, and it's of course supporting innovation. But it means Gaia X will lay the fundament, and Catena X, and that is very important, should not invent the wheel a second time, should leverage also the aspects of Gaia X and the initiatives underlying to a greater good, so to say. I think that's very important for me. And that also drives, I think, a different attitude and thinking about technology going forward and how open, not proprietary, more open and open source driven it should be in the future.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, Gaia X has been a little bit of a criticism lately in the press, right? And I've been involved very much. I'm part of the board of directors. I'm now the chair of the board of directors. So it's a tough thing that we're trying to solve there. But I really like the idea how things come together, how Catena X is building on the Gaia X, you know, horizontal baseline, if you like, and is building an industry solution on top. The same we will see in other industries. And I think the idea of Gaia is really sometimes misrepresented. The idea of Gaia is to create the transparency, the simplicity, and a clear picture on how these models, on how digital sovereign platforms can be built so that clients, industries, or also smaller companies can just have a simple way to say, okay, this is a platform where I know what's happening with my data. And we will see the real output coming in terms of platforms like Catena, but also labels, etc. So we will have an interesting move in the next 2 years in Gaia. And if we pull these things together, it will really create this model of a digital sovereign understanding, let's say. So let's look a little bit deeper in the use cases of Catena, right? You mentioned already that we discussed, you know, that it's about production data. So can you give me one good use case that explains exactly what we're doing there in Catena?
Let me start with one. It's maybe the topic of recalls in our industry, you know, because there is hardly a topic that causes greater damage to costs and image, of course, than recalls. And as a digital representation of physical and real objects, the digital twin, for instance, can really help us through the entire production chain. So, and I think that's very important. And that goes from development to production and, of course, to subsequent operation. I think that's one use case we have in mind. The second one is, for instance, when we look to virtual load tests, so, and how we are dealing with them and how they are carried out during production planning. So I think that's also very important, because if error occurs, data access along the entire supply chain helps to quickly identify the cause and correct errors, even predict, and that is, I think, also very important, when a component will reach its load limit before it fails by analyzing the data. I think it's more data-driven what we are doing, and also a bit more predictive. And maybe going also into a topic where we are talking about our dealers and how they are integrated into the information chain, in addition to manufacturers and suppliers as well. That means for our customers, and that's saying a customer is a real benefit out of it, can be really informed about service and repair measures even before the fault occurs. And I think that's, for me, a very important thing we are tackling here. And it's also about a global perspective, because our value chain is global. You know, and I think with the partners involved here, and also with the tech partners involved here, and T-Systems is one of them, we can handle that very properly.
Thank you. And I think I just want to highlight one aspect that you mentioned. I think if you look on the use cases that we are looking at in Catena, there are use cases that involve actually customer involvement, right? The actual driver, the user of the vehicle, and for those, it is very important that there is clarity around what is going on with the data. This will accelerate the usage of the digital offerings, which is in the end all what we're working for. So I think we've solved quite a little bit on this Rubik's Cube on the cloud and on sovereignty. So maybe we move on to another topic. We move on to other topics that are relevant that we didn't touch on today. So what about things like sustainability? What other aspects do you think are important when it comes to Europe's way in the cloud?
I think sustainability as CO2 is a key and essential aspect of our time, and of course for us as a global company. And of course, CO2 is also emitted in the production of our automobiles. And I think that's very important to recognize. And when you look to, that is also what we are tackling, determining the quantity of a very complex calculation, which is with CO2 levels of individual components of our entire supplier base, of our entire value chain, it makes it very complicated. And so what we really like also, and what we want to achieve with Catena-X, that we simplify the calculation so that it is not complex anymore. And I think that is one aspect, especially when you look to that and you know from each raw material supplier, for instance, from Africa up to Europe or from Asia up to China, then you can really also commit to that and drive sustainability, drive also far more CO2 neutral company. And not only looking from our production value chain on that topic, also I'm looking from my original accountability as heading infrastructure, cybersecurity, for instance, all these pieces. It's very important also that we go in the heavy energy-driven business, for instance, high-performance computing or data center operation towards CO2 neutrality and to sustainability. So that's a clear aim for us here as Mercedes-Benz and Daimler AG. And we are really looking forward to that, to drive that with our partner ecosystem, but also with Catena-X as a great initiative.
Thank you, Hartmut. And I think that kind of wraps it up perfectly. What we want to build in Europe is not only the most data sovereign and technology sovereign solutions, we also want to do a real sustainable digitization of the industry, because the best way to reduce CO2 emissions is to not get it started in the beginning. So thank you very much, Hartmut, for joining me. It was a great conversation. Thank you for tuning in. And I'm handing it back to Catherine.